Let's look, we've talked about the roles, and now we'll talk about responsibilities. I think there are two main responsibilities we have as parents. One is inspiration, and the other is instruction. And Brenda's going to talk about the instruction piece and kind of close us out today because we're running out of time. I wasn't sure we had enough to cover all the time, and wow, there's a lot there. So what are your responsibilities? Inspiration and instruction. If we go to inspiration, we want to inspire others to love Jesus and to love others and to love ourselves. So how do we inspire our love for Jesus? There's a lot of different ways. Somebody give me an idea as to how we would be an inspiration to others in the way that we love Jesus. We're asking a lot of higher level thinking questions, so it's a little harder. How will other people know that you love Jesus? Let's make it more concrete. What are some things you do that would let people know that you love Jesus? Forgiveness, wow. Tremendous. That people are aware because of what Jesus has done for you and your appreciation for that in the same way he forgave you, you're forgiving others. So it does both, right? It shows that Jesus' love has impacted your life and your love for him is expressed in forgiveness. What's another way? What is God looking for? Helping people in need, that's part of helping others and doing that. How do we show we love Jesus? What is God looking for? What did he tell the Samaritan woman that God was looking for? We can share about what Jesus has done in our life. We're still talking about what Jesus has done and how we love him. Yeah, talking about it's good. Huh? Well, yeah, that's a great way, right? Stop sinning, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? Jesus talks to the Samaritan woman. He says that he's looking for worshipers who will worship him in spirit, with their emotion, with their feelings, and with truth. When we apply the principles of Jesus to our life, and we have a joy about us in our relationship with him. I always know that somebody loves Jesus when he pops into every conversation, or when they talk about, wow, I was spending time in prayer and God revealed to me. Well, we know you've been spending time with Jesus because you're loving him, you care for him. If I never spent time with Brenda, she wouldn't be able to say to the degree of certainty that I love her. But because I prioritize and I spend time with her and I talk about her when I'm with other people, and I talk about the relationship we have and what it means to me, that stuff matters. And then live by faith and dependency on God. In other words, we do the things that Jesus prescribes for us to do in life. When we do those things and we live by faith, and we're going to depend on God in our parenting. We're going to depend on God in our finances, that we're going to honor him with the first fruits. We're going to give our tithes and offerings. When we're going to trust that he's our source. We're not our own source. We don't have to make our own way. When we live by faith, that's inspiring to people. We often talk about missionaries. It's so easy to raise money for missionaries because they've left everything and they've went to a place living by faith, trusting that God in a new culture and in a new place and a new setting is going to be able to do the work through them. Speak hope and encouragement into the lives of others. Always, you inspire others when you speak hope, when you encourage them. People need encouragement. They need affirmation. They need encouragement. Be a person that's always speaking positive into life. When the Holy Spirit gives you something, it should be something that edifies and builds up somebody else. Encourage them as they're trying and struggling. encourage them that God's going to help them. Sow generously. Be a generous person. You will inspire your children to generosity by being generous. Our kids are very generous with their finances, with their time and their talent, because we have been generous in front of them. They've got to see it. It's inspired them. In some ways, they've taken it to a whole nother level. Be helpful and dependable. Be a person that is reliable, that inspires loyalty. Enjoy life. When we talk about, if I say this person's a great Christian, would you think of the person who's the most fun? No, we think about this person who has all these rules and regulations in their life. That's not what Jesus is about. It's about enjoying life. It's about understanding all that God has done for you and not having that weight of having to, through performance or through this, that, or the other thing, somehow earn it. It's already been given to you. I'm just living in the freedom that God has given me to explore and enjoy life. Be a person that enjoys your walk with God. And then find the good in others. If you want to be an inspiration, sit with people and talk about the good in their life. And sometimes you got to look pretty hard. I'll be honest. Sometimes it's a chore, but find something positive in someone that you can speak over that. And what you'll find is the more you speak positive in others, the better people will be to you. Not the better they'll treat you, that will happen too, but the better and the higher number you'll put on someone, the more value you'll give them in your own mind. And then overcome. You're all going to go through trouble. Stick it out. You know how you run a marathon? You don't stop. You just keep taking one more step. And as long as you keep taking the next step, you're going to finish. It's only when you stop. And some things in life are going to take a long time to overcome. And other things are short. Just stay at it. Persevere. The more things you overcome in your life, the more inspirational your life is. The more your children, the more others will want to be like you. And so there's that part of parenting that's inspiration. And then there's that part of parenting that's instruction. And Brenda's going to take us home with the instruction piece.
All right. So we're going to look at Erikson's stages of development. If any of you took general psychology in college, you probably were exposed to this concept. It's been around for a long time, Erik Erikson's stages of development. But it's really, it still holds true today. It's still taught today. And it talks about how there are certain tasks at each stage of our development that we need to overcome to have emotional health. And you'll look at this slide that's up there right now, and it shows just from infancy all the way to older adulthood that that there are things even in our old age that we need to overcome and address to have emotional health. And I think so. It basically shows that all throughout life we're growing and we're learning. It never stops. But as parents, it's important for us to be aware of these stages and use them in how we meet the needs of our children most effectively. So let's go to the next slide, because we're going to focus in on the specifics of infancy through adolescence. All right. So in the first stage of infancy to 1 year old, the big issue or task that children are faced with in their development is trust versus mistrust, and that if their needs are met, then they have a sense of trust. And these stages that Erikson has for our development is also pretty consistent with Maslow, Abraham Maslow. How many of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? So yeah, so they're very similar. Erikson's stages are more defined and specific, but Maslow too, they talks about that, how we have to work through these different tasks to build upon our emotional health, and that if we get stuck in one, that it basically stunts our emotional development. And so what would be some of the basic needs as an infant that you need to have met? What do you think? Yeah, it's all about our just to survive. We have to be fed, we have to have air, we have to have shelter, we have to be protected from the elements. We need to be touched. So in that first year of life, if those needs are provided, then we are having that sense of trust with the world around us. So that seems pretty easy, right? We should be able to do that pretty well. But I used to do child protective service work, and I can tell you there are a lot of people who don't get that at all because they're letting other things take their time, whether it's substance abuse or it's being too focused on work performance and neglecting needs. You'd be amazed at all socioeconomic levels of people who don't even get this basic need met for their children. So we start with that, but if this is met effectively, then the infant has that sense of trust, and these needs are really met by their primary caregivers. And then from that we go into the next stage of development, toddlerhood, 1 to 3. And the task or the issue that they're facing is autonomy versus shame and doubt. That toddlers have to learn to exercise their will, do things for themselves. And if they don't get to experience that, then they become insecure. They feel that they aren't capable. And so we need to encourage them within some safe support, though, to explore for themselves and to do what are some of the things that kids learn to do in that stage of life? Walk, talk, feed themselves, maybe start dressing themselves to some extent, hopefully toilet training. Right? So but those are big things. And if they're not accomplishing some of those things, then they have that sense of shame and doubt. And so we want to encourage them that they can do it and help them. And we teach them, right? Kids aren't going to just learn it on their own, but we have to help them and support them in it. And then the preschool stage, 3 to 6 years, initiative versus guilt. So preschoolers are learning to initiate tasks, carry out plans, or they can feel guilty about their efforts to be independent. How many moms reluctantly drop their kids off at preschool that first day and you're crying more than your kid is because you realize, this is the beginning of letting them go? But that's what our job is to prepare them to let them go. So we want them to feel confident in taking that initiative and being apart from us and independent of us to take that initiative. And so that's a really important phase in a child's life that we want to encourage that for them, that this is healthy and normal and it's part of, the plan, that ultimately you'll be your own person and live your own life, and it starts, preschool. It's time, all right? It's that separation time. We want them to have a healthy experience with that. And then elementary school, 6 years to puberty. So this is a big span and probably one of the most critical stages in development. There's so much happening. And so this is where they're developing that sense of competence versus inferiority. So really, by the time they get into that middle school, junior high years, their sense of what they can do is determined. Their sense of who they are and their abilities and what their future holds for them, they're determining that in the span of 6 or 7 years, so it's really huge. So children learn the pleasure of applying themselves to tasks, or they feel inferior, and there's so much. Think about the foundational educational things that you're learning with reading and writing and spelling and mathematics and technology, and science. All of these things you're being introduced to in this span.
It's really critical in this age not to compare them.
Mm-hmm.
You're not as good as or whatever. We don't want to see inferiority. We want to encourage their maximum application, right? And so we want to be rewarding them for improvements. If they're doing better, rather than comparing them to the neighbor's kid. We have a preschooler that's right? So it's really important as they go through this stage especially that we're excited about what they're learning and what they're applying on their own.
Yeah, and having reasonable expectations. We talked in our group earlier about that, how, maybe we were quick learners and we took to reading really well, but our child's a little slower, and so we're frustrated. But they're different. They're not us, and so we have to look at what's reasonable and work with that and encourage them. And nowadays with the school systems, there's so many assessments and tools that are made available. And I remember when our kids, they would bring home their standardized tests and things, and we would look, and my son was off the charts in every subject area, considered gifted, and wow, that's great, and we pushed him, and you should have straight A's in every subject, and but we also had data to support our expectations were realistic. And our daughter, she was very different, and she had certain areas that she was off the charts and other areas where she struggled, and so we had to support her in those areas and know that these are two different people, two different sets of abilities. We want them to do their best at their capacity, like we talked about before. And so knowing that and helping them, but we want them to feel successful at whatever that is for them, right? So that...
By helping her feel successful in areas where she, relative to other students, wasn't doing well, she has by far success.
Yes, that is right. That's right.
Because others need to feel that they weren't as good. So you can still encourage, they still need to learn how to do that.
Absolutely.
They still need to learn how to do math. It's not that if the comparison can create long-lasting emotional damage.
Sure, I'll never be good enough, so why should I try, right? That's how a child can perceive that, where we want to say, try your best, do your best, and then cheer them on, and celebrate their success, which is going to be different for each child, but so important. And then the adolescent years into young adulthood, and this is where a lot of that emotional intelligence is developing too, and relational, that's going to impact them for life. So this is very critical too, that identity versus role confusion. The teenagers are working at refining a sense of self by testing roles and then integrating them to form a single identity, or they become confused about who they are. And I think today this stage of development is more challenging than ever, again, because there's just so much confusing information and such an extreme in what's being presented to our kids. So communication is really important. And again, that biblical teaching, that foundation, that worldview that we're having to instill at home and through our church, because that's not going to happen in a public education setting. Matter of fact, they're going to hear things quite contrary to that. So we have to be prepared to counter that.
This stage is really important to understand that your children are forming an identity that's not you.
Right.
And so a lot of times they can't hear what you're saying because it's part of their developmental piece that they're not you. So they don't talk to you as much anymore. Or they're trying things that are different from you. They may not even like them, but it's just different.
They want to separate themselves, which is what they should be doing.
They should be doing that as normal development. So it's important to bring people that are not you into their lives that are going to help you see positive things into their life. Like youth ministries and things like that are important. So other people that you can say the same thing somebody else says, and they hear it, and it's like, oh, that's the best thing I ever heard.
Yep.
I just told you that.
Yep. And think about it when you were a teenager. There was that certain teacher that was the cool teacher that everything they said was it to you, that you wanted to be like, or that aunt or uncle versus your parent. There's people, adult role models that you looked up to that weren't your parents. And, I think it's when you're a teenager, you tend to see all the faults in your parents too, and imperfections. Yeah. So, but it's them trying to develop their sense of who they are and wanting it to be distinct and different.
Don't take that as an affront to who you are.
Yes.
Just understand that they have to discover who they are.
Yes.
And you have to facilitate that. young for doing it this way or that way. If you get in arguments with them, it delays them moving forward out of this. And especially as they get towards college age or whatever. You do get smarter after they get out of college. But the things you say and the other things, don't take offense to it, or you're going to have a bad relationship with your kid. It's part of their process. Just make sure you're putting other good people in their life around
Exactly.
you.
Exactly.
And be that to somebody else's child.
Yeah, so important. All right, let's move on to the next slide of instruction with some strategies. And there's a quote, from a psychologist that says, 7 things every child needs to hear throughout every stage of development. I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry, meaning admitting when we make mistakes. I forgive you. We're not going to hold things against them forever. I'm listening. This is your responsibility. Now, that's a surprising one, right? But it's huge, and so much work now in child development research is showing how important it is to teach that. We kind of got off track, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, they have to take responsibility for things in their life, and you have what it takes to succeed. Those things are so important, and they are biblically consistent things to teach your children and to model to your children. But every child, every stage of development needs to hear this and see this. And it's consistent with how Christ demonstrates his love for us. All right? And then Frederick Douglass says, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I love that because we want to do our best to, as parents, we don't want them to experience hurt and problems later, right? And I think that we've talked about that, how it motivates so much of what we do. We don't want them to make our mistakes and all that. And so sometimes in our good intentions, we go too far. But we do want to help. We want to set a good foundation. That's key. We don't want them to have issues down the road. So we want to make sure that we are doing the best that we can through the biblical principles that are given to us. And so some strategies that can help us with that. Create an environment where they can discover, develop, and do in accordance with their developmental stage in life. How might you do that? How might you create that environment for them to discover, develop, and do? What do you think? You have to expose them to opportunities, to explore interests. That would be one way, right? And then encouraging them in that development as they identify or discover, and giving them opportunities to put it into practice. Would you add anything to that?
I think sometimes we have to give them an opportunity to discover that their idea is not the best idea.
Yep.
A lot of parents, we don't ever want our kids to fail. But as believers, we believe there's no condemnation, not in failure. And so while we talk about the alternatives, if they choose something that's not going to lead to death, they're going to do a backflip off the roof into the pool, that might be a no. But if they want to try this or that or the other thing, we give them the opportunity to discover for themselves that their idea is not always the best idea. And if we have to be willing, though, for them to discover that their idea is better than ours. Right? That's sometimes hard for us to take because we're supposed to know everything. We don't. And then to develop, once they discover something, they need time to, with others, that's why we try to put them in more of a community thing, learn how that fits in with the bigger calling in their life, and where they ultimately actually do something based on that. Mission trips are a great way to discover, develop, and do. That's an opportunity where they get to discover culture differently than theirs. Often they get to work with other people and develop their unique gifts and talents with that, and then do something as they get older. There are opportunities like that.
And another aside to that, too, with missions trips is seeing other cultures that don't live like we live. It can be so eye-opening and give them a better perspective of what's really important. Yeah.
But at each age, there's different discovery levels, development, and healing. Our kids in the preschool, going back to that age, what's kind of fun is watching them do big projects where they're identifying signs and they're what is a sign, and they make their own signs, they develop them together, and then they drive their parents crazy as they drive by. Oh, there's a sign, you know. They're discovering the world around them, they're developing together as they're putting together, making their own signs, and then they're out in the world and they're understanding what certain signs mean, and they're able to communicate that back. Those are ways of developing. Even at a young age, they can learn a lot more than you think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have to create that environment.
Yeah. Number 3 says, remember they're not a mini you, and that's really important. I think we so sometimes get caught up in wanting them to accomplish the things maybe we didn't quite do that we hoped we would. We want to kind of live our life through them. Maybe it's as a second chance. We got to remind ourselves not to do that. That they're different. They're not us, and we want them to be the person that God created them to be. So, and if we go to the next slide, instruction, correction, and let's talk about that. Proverbs 10:17, people who accept discipline are on the pathway to life, but those who ignore correction will go astray. So correction is important, and we've talked about how God says we discipline. He disciplines us because he loves us, and the same is true with our children. In Proverbs 3:11 and 12, my child, don't reject the Lord's discipline and don't be upset when he corrects you. So we want to teach our children that concept that we're trying to instruct and correct them. We're not trying to punish them. We're trying to discipline them or teach them. And there's a big difference in that. And so when we go and look further at instruction and correction, it's God disciplines out of love. Discipline's not equal to punishment because discipline teaches and is forward-looking. And that's how we want to approach our kids, that we're looking at what can we learn from this, and so that we can do right, do better, have a better, more fulfilling life in the future, not make the same mistakes. Punishment's about paying them for the past mistake, and it kind of like is saying you're not good enough. It conveys that sense that you don't have worth or value. Discipline's saying, I know you have value and I want to see you reach it. So there's a difference in it, that looking at the past versus looking ahead. And so it's in our approach. And then also personal responsibility is learned through consequences. And that's so important that we teach our kids that they have to take responsibility for their actions, for their decisions. And how do they learn that? By experiencing the consequences, that we can't protect them from every consequence in life, and that is a biblical concept. I'm responsible for my choices. My success in life largely depends on my choices. It's not controlled by other people. And I think there's a mindset in our overprotectiveness that we've got going in parenting today that keeps us from taking that responsibility and learning that lesson. And we have to learn to be responsible and accept consequences. Others affect me, but I choose how I respond. So this is so important. And when you look today at some of the parenting styles that are out there, whether it's protective or permissive, we see that there's a lot of concern now for how it's affecting young adults and how they're living their lives. And actually the University of Michigan has done some studies on this and about what's necessary for strengthening families today. And they're actually saying and our desire to do better than our parents did and protect our children, from harm and all these things we want to do for them, that we've overcorrected and we're now having negative results from that, not what we intended. And the research is starting to back that up, and I'll talk about that. So You've heard of helicopter parents, the ones who want to, buzz in and like stop and protect, everything that's going to happen. They don't want their kids to ever experience any kind of hurt or any kind of pain or emotional harm or consequence to their behavior. They call them snowplow or bulldozer parents. Have you heard that term? They're the ones that they're going to get in there and they're going to actually physically stop and fight. You've heard about moms who win and beat up kids that in cheerleading competitions and things like that because they're not going to let anybody, take away from their child. It's such an extreme. Or the parents you see who, like, their kid calls and says, oh, I forgot my homework, and so the parent's, like, racing through traffic and gets a speeding ticket or is late to work and gets written up because, they had to go rescue their kids so they didn't get, a bad grade for not doing their homework. You're taking on all of the responsibility for your child, and you think that you're doing that to help them. But you're not, because what's it teaching them? That somebody else is going to bail me out, that it's not my problem. And so we were actually having the opposite impact of what we wanted for them. You also have the extreme of that permissive parent who says, my parents were just so about, children are to be seen and not heard, and you do what I say, you don't question me because I said so, is the answer to, when they say, why do I have to do that? And so there's this permissive style of parenting, that has these low expectations and not going to define anything. We're not going to put any limits on my kid because they're going to explore and find themselves, without me trying to tell them what to do. We're going to be their friend. When they act up, we're going to bribe them into being good, oh, I'll buy you a toy if you, things like that. That's that permissive style of parenting. Again, it's an overcorrection. And we think that, that's in their best interest, but what we're teaching them is that, again, that lack of personal responsibility. And so what the research is now showing that's happening with these kinds of parenting styles is that kids are being underprepared for adulthood. They're being afraid to live on their own. They're afraid to step out. They don't know how to handle their finances. There's higher levels of anxiety and depression, higher levels of dependence on antidepressant and anti-anxiety drugs in young adults now. Greater insecurity. The whole thing that parents think they're going to fix, they're actually harming. And there's a lack of creativity because parents are doing everything for them. They're not having to think.
How many of you have attempted to do this homework so they get a better grade?
Good.
That's taking away from their capacity, right?
And
Do the extra artwork so their display looks better.
yeah.
That happens too.
Oh, it happens a lot. I mean, I've had moms post on Facebook, did an all-nighter, and they post this beautiful project. And I'm thinking, really? But it happens. I will say, my son used to send me his college papers. I have to confess. He would, at midnight, he'd be up all night, and his papers due the next day, and he'd call me at midnight, Mom, can you proof my paper for me? And I did a few times, but not always. But yeah. I confess. But no, what we're seeing too is lower achievement from the kids because of it, poor decision-making skills, lack of problem solving. They're not having to solve their problems because we did it for them. And this is surprising, more aggression. They're not learning self-control, so they're becoming more aggressive, and they think it's okay because everything is about them. Their world evolves around them. They're being taught that they're the center of the universe. And how many of you have learned that's really not true? When you go to work or wherever in life, like, we're not the center of the universe. There's a lot of people out there, and so we have to, while we want them to feel good about who they are because of who God made them, not because they're special in and of themselves, right? But that's what is being conveyed through these protective and permissive parenting styles. And so what these researchers are now saying what families need to be strong is, one, parental resilience. As parents, we have to be strong, able to go with the flow, but also being able to react to things and model for our kids coping mechanisms and not give in to them with the easiest thing, right? That we need social connections, that our kids are taught how to have healthy social interactions and valuing working together as opposed to just promoting their own self and their own interest. And that as parents, we need child development knowledge, which I think most parents nowadays do. We have an abundance of knowledge, but to be purposeful about understanding the developmental stages that your child's in. And then having a concrete support system. And that's what I believe the church is about, is that we have people of like faith and like minds to support us and to bounce ideas off and to say, I've had a really bad day, and they can say, don't worry, I've been there, I've done that. And then having social and emotional competency. Because when we don't teach our kids to take responsibility, to learn from mistakes and have consequences, we're seeing that entitlement, that sense of entitlement, that sense of egocentricism, again, that I mentioned, and that lack of self-regulation and relying on medication, relying on other things, other people to meet their needs. And so that overcorrection needs to stop, and we really need to go back to those fundamentals again that we've been talking about today, having that worldview that's based on the Bible, that's based on biblical principles and concepts, living that example in front of our kids, and being involved in their lives, communicating, which means not just talking, but listening and being there for them. And you keep looking at your watch, so it's making me feel like we better wrap up. Okay. Well, tell me how you want to wrap up then.
Just taking through the slides so that you have the information. We're at safe suffering.
Okay, so safe suffering is again that law of sowing and reaping. It's a biblical concept that you let your children experience the natural, logical consequences of their choices within safe parameters. And
The reason why you have to let them suffer the consequences, because somebody always has to pay for the choice. So if they don't pay for it, somebody else has to pay for it. And oftentimes as parents, we take the consequence of their choice. And so we suffer for their bad choices. And when they're younger, it's not so much. But when they become adults and they make bad choices, we suffer a lot more. And they suffer because we learn how to deal with things at an earlier stage. So now the suffering is huge versus
right.
living in the above.
Yeah, and control versus choices, it's the same concept that we have to let them make choices and experience the result of that.
Look for ways to give them choices.
Yes, yes.
If this scenario happens, then this is something that we can do. If you choose not to do that, then this is not available. If you choose to do that, here's another consequence. So you can look for ways to create wins for them where they make the decision. You have to be able to live when they choose poorly. But the more they choose poorly, the better they'll be able to make good decisions.
And then delayed gratification, teaching them self-control, and having goals that you're working toward, that you don't have to have everything now. That's such an important concept in life and in this instant society. And that's one of the things, too, in the research when they talk about millennials not wanting to leave home because they can't afford to live like they've been living with their parents. Well, of course not. Did we when we first left home? You have to take time and work and earn. And so, yeah, this delayed gratification. And we have to teach that to our kids as an important concept. And respecting limits of others, no. And again, that's about you're not the center of the world. Not everybody doesn't have to do what you want when you want. So we better not be doing that for them as parents because nobody else in life's going to. Other people are going to tell you no sometimes. We respect no's as a boundary, and that's a good thing. And then guidelines for consequences. It's intended to increase their sense of responsibility and control in their life, just like my husband just talked about. So it's not about hurting them or making them feel bad, but again, teaching them so that they can make good choices in the future. Has to be age appropriate. Seems like common sense, but again, age appropriate. What can they understand? Trying to sit and have a lengthy explanation with a 2-year-old, no, that's not age appropriate. They don't have higher level thinking yet. So more immediate things like physically removing them from a situation. You do different, the way that you intervene has to depend on the age and the ability, the mental ability, cognitive ability of the child. And it should be, your correction should be related to the seriousness of the infraction, Trying to think of an example. You don't ground them for a month if they...
We just had a family where the son took his mother's $50,000 special fee and went to the Netherlands and did severe damage to it. So the father's approach was, you're not driving until you're out of high school. So you've got another year for this punishment. The mom was like, don't worry about it, I'll take care of everything. And so there has to be something before you go to right. So one is he has a job, and so he should pay for the damages as part of the consequence of that choice. Yes, there should be broken trust, and so now you don't get to do that. But you can't drive for the year. But I said, give him, if he chooses to do some of these other things, that he can reduce the amount of time that he's not allowed to drive. Teach him to build trust again by doing these things. And so that combination of things is actually allowing him to suffer for his mistake, but also by doing positive things, he can limit the consequence of his behavior. So it's teaching them to approach it from a positive way and to be part of that. So I think that's kind of an example of
definitely.
For that. But it's amazing what your kids will come up and find ways to do to challenge your approach to that.
Right. All right, we're going to wrap it up with that last slide and that verse.
Basically, the last slide just says, you don't have to be anxious about this. If you can take everything to God, He's going to give you the wisdom. It doesn't mean there won't be difficult times. Sometimes our children teach us how to be better parents, what they do. And that means that there's going to be some disappointments in ourselves and others. I wish we would have known, wish we could have. But we work together through that and take it to God and trust Him for His help and all that. And as believers, we have each other too. We're going to need to help each other parent in this process. We have more responsibilities for our own children than we do other people's children, but we still have responsibilities as part of the body of Christ to help to raise the children that we come in contact with. And so it's not the same as your own individual family, but you do have responsibilities, and other people have responsibilities to help you too. So be part of that community that helps to raise your children and learn from each other. That's just